Hello everyone, how's it going? And welcome to my Wild Rift tier list for patch 5.0. This is a really big update for Wild Rift, not in terms of the champion changes, but a lot of system changes that have come into play, with dual lane getting the big hit, with XP changes, also minion changes, so everyone not getting as much gold as what they did before, but also in terms of the map as well, you know, a lot of dragon changes with the dragon souls, Baron lane alcove as well, which means that my tier list has changed ever so slightly. Most of the things have not really changed. You know, the addition of the new items has not impacted the game as much as what I thought it would, and many other things as well. It means that some champions have moved up and down, and some champions have moved really high up because of new items and some of new additions to the game itself. So we're going to go over every single role. I'll leave timestamps in the description. If you feel like a champion deserves to be higher or lower in the tier, let me know down in the comments. I always read the comments and reply to them, so let me know down below, and let's get into this. Right, first up, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the Baron lane. Baron lane probably got one of the biggest changes, with items like Hot Steel, Titanic Hydra, and Spear of Shogun being added onto the Rift. Honestly, these items have not really made as much of an impact as what I thought it would. You know, Spear of Shogun, the passive is not really as great as what it is on PC League of Legends. The stats are not too bad. You know, you get the health, the AD, and the ability haste, which is kind of decent. But the passive is really kind of where the downside of the item really comes in. Heart Steel is a pretty good item. You mainly want to build this as a first item on some tanks like Mundo and Sion that you can see have moved up into S tier thanks to the addition of Heart Steel. And Titanic Hydra, again, an item that hasn't really impacted the meta as much. The damage is not really there. The passive being on 2.5 second cooldown is not really that effective at all. Again, the stats are pretty decent. You know, you get a decent amount of HP. You get a little bit of attack damage, which doesn't really impact it that much. But the big thing is obviously Heart Steel making tanks a lot stronger than what they were before. Tanks now have a really strong first item that allows you to stack up to a crazy amount of maximum health. In terms of the tiers itself, nothing really has changed too much. You know, the S+ tier, we still got a lot of strong jewelers that are up in the Baron lane. You know, Jackson Fiora for the split pushing, and Camille as well. You know, these three champions offer great team fight presence and great split pushing. You can look to try and carry games. All three of these champions are great. They don't really use the new items that well, but they're still really strong. Jay still incredibly powerful in the Baron lane as well. Probably has better matchups in the mid lane, but he can still perform very well in the Baron lane. And Renekton also back up there in the S+ tier. Main reason why Renekton's back up there is because of the Spear of Shogun. Renekton is probably one of the best users for Spear of Shogun because of the passive. When you use your ultimate, you gain movement speed, and also you gain ability haste on all your abilities. This is great for Renekton because he can use his empowered abilities more often with his ultimate, and he's probably one of the only champions that really benefit from Spear of Shogun. He's one of the only champions that actually have Spear of Shogun in the build, because the website has updated. I've updated all the builds, but you can see Spear of Shogun is there as a bit of a later game item, which I think most of these items are. You know, Spear of Shogun and Titanic Hydra is a bit more of a late game item, whereas Heart Steel is more of a first item. S tier, again, some champions that are, you know, tanks that are build Heart Steel first item. Shen, Ornn, Mundo, Sion, and Malphite. I don't think these champions are going to be, you know, broken tier like in the S+ tier, but I think they have become a lot stronger now in this patch thanks to Heart Steel. And you can build Titanic Hydra on these items, but I think the only champion that could really work well with Titanic Hydra is probably Sion, because he's the only one that really benefits from the attack damage. You could talk about Shen as well with his split pushing. Shen with his split pushing can benefit quite a lot from Titanic Hydra. Other than that, these other champions don't really, you know, do too well. Set is a champion that also could use Heart Steel thanks to his second ability. His second ability does really well when you're building a lot of maximum health, so you can go for that sort of build where you go for Grasp Beyond Dying into full tank set, or you can still play Bruiser set. I still think Bruiser set is a lot stronger at the moment, but you can go for a different alternative route. Other champions still sitting in the S tier that are very strong. You know, Wukong with the range change on his first ability is really nice. Darius is still very strong. Aatrox, Yone, Gwen. Akali I've moved down from S+ tier to S tier. I don't think the champion has that much impact anymore, especially with items like Heart Steel and everything coming in. Akali doesn't do too well against tanks in lane, and she kind of struggles a little bit when trading. Garen is still pretty decent. Again, I moved Garen down. I don't think Garen is as strong. Not really a user that uses Heart Steel or any of the new items. And that's pretty much it for the S tier. In terms of the A tier, again, I've moved some of the champions down from S tier down to A tier. I was thinking of champions that maybe don't fit in the S tier as well. It's kind of weird because I feel like I should add back in the A+ tier, because champions like Irelia and Riven, they're probably better than every single one of these champions in A tier, but they're not as good as the champions in S tier. You know, Irelia, pretty difficult to play. Champion still works pretty well. Riven, again, another champion that also works with Spirit Shoujin. You can see I also have Spirit Shoujin in the Riven build. Again, probably one of the only champions again that can work well with Spirit Shoujin because of the new passive. But again, she doesn't really work too well. She doesn't really trade that well during the laning phase. Kennen is pretty underrated. I think Kennen is actually performing really well at the moment. The champion does quite a lot of damage and quite a lot of burst damage and can definitely be a really, really big carry. Teemo's still up there. Vladimir, a lot better in the mid lane. Yasuo, if you want to build tank Yasuo Baron lane, that can still work okay. And the same with Gragas. B tier, Trendemir, Olaf, Pantheon, Volibear, and Urgot. These champions don't really offer too much. They don't really impact the map too much, especially champions like Urgot and Volibear. Baron lane is not very good at the moment, especially after some of his nerfs recently. And then down in C tier, we have Kayle, Nasus, and Singed, which unfortunately these champions don't really do too well. Onto the jungle. The same 4 champions are staying up in the S+ tier. They're staying completely broken, and for a good reason. Kha'Zix still incredibly strong assassin. Same with Evelynn as well. Really, really big carry with Shadow Assassin Kayn. Lee Sin as well. Also one of the best champions in the jungle right now. No surprise really that all 4 of these champions are staying in the S+ tier. In terms of the S tier, I've moved quite a lot of the champions down. I've kind of tried to separate them ever so slightly because I had quite a few champions in the S tier, so I've tried to separate them to move some of the champions down. And I, you know, sort of thought to myself, you know, what are the champions that could really make a big impact in the jungle, and what are the champions that can really carry a game? And I think every champion in the S tier at the moment is a great carry in the jungle. I don't think there's a single champion here that I'm looking through at the moment that I think that you can't play in the jungle. Anyone in S tier you can play and be a really, really insane carry. Especially champions like Xin Zhao at the moment. Xin Zhao, after some of the buffs and also because of his first ability also getting buffed in terms of his range, he's a really, really great jungler at the moment. Clears the jungle very, very quickly and is great during team fights. Again, I think one of the underrated champions this patch that is very, very strong. Vi with the lockdown is incredibly powerful. Riven's still really good. Jarvan also really strong with the lockdown. Yone, Hecarim is... Honestly, I was thinking of moving Hecarim back up to S+ tier. This champion is still incredibly powerful. People get baited by building Spirit Shoujin on Hecarim. You don't want to build Spirit Shoujin on Hecarim. It's not very good at all, unfortunately, because he already has a low cooldown on his first ability. So getting cooldown on his second and third ability is not really that impactful. Wukong, probably a bit on the less side in terms of a carry jungler, but offers a lot in terms of team fights and crowd control. Gragas, Fizz, Fiddlesticks, Aatrox, Jason, Darius, you know, all these champions are just incredible in the jungle, and there's not a single champion here that I could see, I could say that is, you know, bit on the left side in terms of a carry. A tier, some of these champions can still work. I think in certain scenarios these champions can still work out pretty well, but they're a little bit less of a carry more than the other champions. So, you know, some champions to highlight in this tier, you know, Morgana still has really, really high wave clear and jungle clear, sorry, and still clears the jungle the fastest out of anyone, is still really impactful. Zed can still be a carry. You can still do pretty well on Zed. You know, Camille with the lockdown, Nunu with the permanent ganks. There are still some champions here that I can, you know, you could say that there are, you know, they are stronger than the others in the tier, but again, it's very difficult to separate, you know, S tier with A tier. And I kind of gone for an approach where I would rather put champions lower down in the tier and have them fighting for a spot in like the A tier rather than the S tier, because I had way too many champions in the S tier. But yeah, quite a few champions in the A tier that can still perform pretty well. You know, Rengar can still try and one shot, do pretty well. Red Kayn is obviously a lot weaker than Shadow Assassin Kayn, so that is that. And yeah, there's a few other champions there. B tier, these champions don't really impact the game at all. I don't think Mundo is that good as a jungle. Obviously, Hot still being added to the game is quite nice for Mundo, but again, you're not going to stack Hot still in a jungle. You don't want to build Hot still with jungle Mundo. Yes, you can maybe gank and auto attack a few times, and yes, it can work out pretty well, but honestly, most of the time, you don't want to build this. But you know, you don't want to build Hot still on Dr. Mundo jungle at all. You know, his jungle clear is not really that good anymore, and that's why he's staying down in the B tier. Even though he got a bit of a buff with the items, he's still not great as a jungler overall. No, Fiora a bit on the weaker side, Lilia, Rammus, Amumu, you know. So again, some of these champions could perform pretty well. A lot of people say that Amumu and Rammus should be higher, but again, I look at the tiers above and I think of, yeah, I guess they're easier to play. They're a lot more for beginner players, but they just don't make as much of an impact compared to the other champions above. And Irelia is also down there as well. Warwick, Trendemir, Mosti, and Shyvana. Some of you might be surprised to see Shyvana in the same tier as Mosti, Trendemir, and Warwick, but I never see Shyvana in any of my games anymore. And when I see Shyvana, she just takes way too long to scale. Dragons are not that impactful at the moment. You can't really AFK farm the jungle anymore because of the stacks that happened quite a while ago with the if you just AFK farm through the jungle, you don't get as much gold anymore. So yeah, Shyvana's not really that good. She takes quite a while to scale and stack up with her passive. So yeah, a bit on the difficult side. That's why she's down in the C tier with these other champions. But again, jungle has not really done too much. Mid lane, we have a new champion, SYNDRA, in the mid lane. I think SYNDRA is incredibly powerful if you know how to play her. I think she's a bit on the easy side in terms of, you know, champions that can be played in the mid lane. She's not a very difficult champion to play. She's pretty easy. Her abilities are pretty standard. You know, there is a bit of a skill set with, you know, making sure you use your first ability before your second ability, because if you use your second ability with no nearby dark spheres, then you're going to lose out on 20% of your damage. But overall, very, very strong champion, has incredible wave clear, has incredible one-shot potential as well, really long range as well. Like, it's incredible how much long range SYNDRA has. So really, really nice champion coming into the meta, and I think it's shifted up mid lane ever so slightly, because some of these other mid lane mages have become a lot stronger with SYNDRA coming into the meta, because champions like Ahri can do really well against SYNDRA, Orianna as well. These champions can do really well into SYNDRA, kind of that mage versus mage matchup in the mid lane. But other champions in the S+ tier have pretty much stayed the same: Kassadin, Vladimir, and Jace. Again, Kassadin with the super scale, and the same with Vladimir. Both these two champions are very, very difficult to deal with and are extremely powerful. Jace as well, again, the mid lane, also very good. Again, I've moved some of the champions down from S tier down to A tier. Again, I've made sure that I don't put that many champions in the S tier. I only put champions in the S tier that I know that are incredibly powerful and that can carry games and that are really, really strong. Champions like Ziggs, obviously, since the rework, Ziggs has maybe not been as strong as what he was before. His early game is a little bit weaker, but late game Ziggs is still late game Ziggs, so you still do a lot of damage. Yasuo in the mid lane, still really powerful. Orianna, Yone, Fizz, Ahri, Vex, Irelia, Zoe, Akali. You know, there's not any champion here. I mean, Irelia might, you know, seem quite surprising because she's in lower tiers in the Baron lane and jungle, but Irelia has so much kill potential in the mid lane against these mages at the moment. You know, against champions like SYNDRA, Vladimir, Kassadin, she has a lot of kill pressure in the mid lane because she can jump in with her passive, she can jump in with her first ability and deal a lot of damage. So that's why she's sitting in a higher tier mid lane than the other lanes. Zoe, obviously such a frustrating champion to play against, still really, really strong. And all the other champions as well are very good, which means that obviously some champions have again moved down into the A tier. Champions like Zyra are just not very good anymore, unfortunately. The nerf that they did to Zyra was very, very big, so Zyra's plants are just not as powerful anymore, and they die a lot quicker than before, so not very powerful. Corki again in mid lane, not very strong anymore, unfortunately. There are some champions here that you can perform pretty well on and still be, you know, pretty good. Lux is not too bad in the mid lane as like a beginner friendly champion. Same with Karma as well. But these champions are just not as good in the mid lane as what they were before. So that's why I've moved some of the champions down and made sure that, you know, there's a bit of a balance, I guess, in a way. Because like I said, I was having too many champions in the S tier. I think in most of the tier lists, you know, most of the tiers that you're going to be looking at in terms of my tier list, champions A and above are completely fine. You can still play them and still perform pretty well. It's when you get down to like the B and the C tier, that's when the champions start to struggle. Yeah, Pyke can still work in the mid lane. Zed as well can be a bit difficult against mages, but can still perform pretty well. Same with Swain. We move down to the B tier and we have the reworked Aurelion Sol. This champion is just not very good. Not very good at all. This champion is very, very weak, especially during the early game. You're basically a sitting minion during the early game. You don't really do any damage. You can't fight in the early game. You can't roam because his flight ability doesn't fly that much across the map anymore. You don't have a lot of crowd control or anything like that. The champion just unfortunately is not that good at the moment. Ever since the rework, he's pretty much sitting in the same tier as what pre-rework Aurelion Sol was. And most of the time with reworks, they want to try and make the champion more viable, more playable, more fun to play. But unfortunately, that's not really the case for Aurelion Sol. There is a point where Aurelion Sol can get up to like, you know, two or three items, or even up to 4 items, and you can scale and then be extremely powerful. But again, it's very difficult to get to that point. And like I said, you're basically a sitting duck in the mid lane. You don't really offer too much. Kai'Sa at the moment, you'll see a bit later on, but Kai'Sa, not really good AD carry at the moment. Mid lane, Kai'Sa's not really a thing anymore, unfortunately. Gragas, still okay in the mid lane, can still work, but doesn't really do too well. Annie, Seraphine, and again, Kenda's sitting in the B tier, but again, pretty underrated champion that you can probably perform pretty well on. And in C tier, again, we have champions in the mid lane that don't really offer too much. You know, Morgana is just basically an AFK bot in mid lane. You just use your pull, you push the wave, and then you just do nothing at all, basically. Brand, again, another mid lane that are struggling at the moment. KO as well, and also Singe. Singe mid lane, you don't really see anymore. Just not really that good, unfortunately, against some of these mages. Singe mid lane was really good with a meta where like bruisers and assassins were playing mid lane, but since we're now getting this sort of mage meta with SYNDRA, Ari, Zoe, you know, all these mages coming in, doesn't mean that Singe is not that good anymore. Onto the dual lane. Again, kind of done the same thing with dual lane. I had this feeling with dual lane that I was honestly thinking of just putting every champion in S tier, like not putting Xayah and Ezreal in the S+ tier and putting them in S tier instead. I cannot think of a champion at the moment in Wild Rift in the dual lane that is broken. That is extremely powerful. The only one is Ezreal, but again, Ezreal's pretty hard to play. He's a bit of a different champion compared to the other AD carries, but there's not a single champion that I can see here that's like insanely above the rest, like a champion that you must pick every single game. I think AD carry is actually in a pretty balanced spot at the moment. I think there are quite a lot of different AD carries that fit different scenarios. You know, Ezreal, if you need the escape, if you need the long range and the safety, then you can play someone like Ezreal. Again, same with Xayah. If you need that sort of safety with your ultimate, really good. If you want hyper carries, if you want scaling, then you can pick champions like Tristana, Zeri, Severe, Kai'Sa. All these champions really good. You want early game aggression, you want early game power. You know, you can pick someone like Lucian, who has become really strong this patch. Slurry Charge Blade buffs, Kraken Slayer buffs. Lucian has become a lot stronger than what he was before. If you want lockdown, if you want crowd control, if you want poke damage, you pick someone like Varus. You know, there are so many different you know, picks that you can go right now that are really powerful. I would say that the A tier champions are a bit weaker than the S tier and the S+ tier champions. They can still work very well. You know, don't get me wrong. Champions like Jinx can still work really well if you pair it with a Lulu, Nami, you know, Lulu, anyone like that. Jinx can be very powerful. Vayne, unfortunately, just takes too long to come online, and she's just not that strong anymore. Draven, again, if you want early game aggression, if you want kill pressure, you can pick someone like Draven that can be really strong, but again, doesn't really, you know, it's very difficult to play, and you can fall behind very quickly. Samira, if you have a lot of lockdown on your team, if you have an aggressive dual lane partner, you can pick someone like Samira, but again, a bit of a difficult champion. Misfortune for the early game is very powerful. Probably one of the most annoying dual lane champions to play against at the moment. Misfortune down the bot lane, but when she scales, when she gets to middle late game, she's not really that powerful. Jhin, again, not really that good. And then B tier as well, champions that are just not impactful at all really at the moment. Twitch never gets played in the jungle. I forgot to mention, but Twitch is actually not in a tier list at the moment in jungle because Twitch jungle is not really a thing anymore. A lot of people playing Twitch down in the dual lane, but again, I don't think Twitch as a champion is very strong. A lot of people building AD Twitch instead of AP Twitch now because of the number changes and what happened in the game. Ashe, if you want lockdown, then she's pretty good. In terms of damage output, she's not really that great. Neela just struggles in Wild Rift. I don't think she really fits. She fits decently in the jungle, but maybe I should add a jungle role for Neela. But in terms of dual lane, she doesn't really do too much. And then Corki's Corki. Again, not really much of a carry, more of a poke champion than anything else. And then we move into the support tier. Support tier was probably one of the most difficult ones in terms of trying to separate the S tier and the A tier, because again, I think supports, again, you fill a lot of shoes with supports. There is a lot of supports that are very powerful at the moment, and a lot of supports that you can play and actually win games with. I think the S+ tier is pretty much stayed the same. I have moved some champions down. I think I moved Lulu down because Lulu just isn't as good as champions like Soraka at the moment. Soraka is just the most broken enchanter support by far. This champion needs changing or something. Like being able to heal someone so much and not costing any health with Soraka is just absolutely disgusting. Pike, the best carry support, sorry, that you can play right now. Really, really impactful with his roams and how strong he can be. And again, Lux as well. Insane burst damage, really good pick potential, and just a really great support overall. But again, champions in the S tier are still really, really powerful. You know, you want a tanky support that can, you know, offer a lot of crowd control and be super tanky. You can play champions like Thresh, Alistar, Nautilus, Leona. These champions are really, really good. Rakan probably fits a bit of both. You know, he can do damage and he can also offer crowd control and tankiness at the same time. Or if you want to play an enchanter support, you can play Nami, Yuumi, Janna, Karma, and Lulu. I think it's very, very difficult at the moment to try and separate the tank supports. Like, I'm thinking at the moment, like, in terms of these tank supports, who is better? Who is like the best one out of these four? And honestly, I can't say out of these five, sorry. And honestly, I can't say. I think all five of these champions offer incredible crowd control and incredible, you know, team fight presence. Same with the enchanters as well. I think all these enchanters are just really, really strong, and it's very difficult to try and separate them. Saying that, we do have some tanks and some other enchanters down the A tier which are not really that strong. Galio as a tank is maybe not as powerful as the ones above, but it can still work pretty well. Same with Brom as well. Brom can also be really, really good if you need to block any sort of poke damage or any crowd control or anything like that. Gragas and Ornn, again, pretty unique picks, but can work really well in the dual lane. Senna, pretty good as a carry if you can get her going. Seraphine, Sonar, not really that great. And again, Zyra, since her nerf, she's not that strong anymore, so she's sitting down in the A tier. And then the B tier, we have Swain, Ashe, Blitzcrank, and Set, with Morgana sitting down in the C tier. So again, not really too much changed in terms of the lower tiers. But that's everything for the tier list for patch 5.0. Again, quite a lot has changed. I've removed some champions. I've added some champions into it. I've also moved quite a lot of champions around. Again, if there are any champions that you feel like deserve to be higher or lower in the tier list, please do let me know. But yeah, overall, I think 5.0 has been pretty decent for the game. I think adding in some tank items have been really, really impactful and have been really good for the game. Has made, you know, build paths a little bit interesting now in terms of the Baron lane champions and also in the jungle. People still get baited by building Heart still as like a third or fourth item, which is not very good at all. But yeah, the website's fully updated now, so you can have a look at all the best builds. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.